Oh, we're live. Okay. So welcome everybody from all over the world. Very excited today to talk about Stanford. And that is, as I don't have to tell you, really in elite business school, very difficult to crack. And we are lucky today to have my colleague, Leila Morrow, here with me. I'm Donna Bowman. I've been with Stratus for over 10 years. We are a very collaborative admissions consulting firm and work every year helping people to understand what they need to do to get into these tough schools like Stanford. So with that, I'm going to let, well, first I'm going to say we're going to talk about admissions tips. We're going to talk about some of the curriculum and things that if you're not able to visit Stanford, maybe to have a chance to talk to an alum like Leila to get some insights that could really help you, whether you're just doing the finishing touches on your applications due September 9th, or if you're looking ahead to that round 2 deadline in early January. So with that, Leila, welcome, and just tell us a little bit more about yourself before we jump in.
Thank you, Donna. Good morning, everyone. As Donna said, I'm Leila Morrow. I graduated the GSB about 20 years ago, and after the GSB, I worked on Wall Street for many years. I also worked in management consulting at McKinsey and did operations. And so, do know that people do get in with the standard degrees as well. So I know that's always a concern. All right, I think we're ready to kick off, and I'm happy to answer your questions as well after Donna and I kind of share some tips along the way.
Yeah, so first of all, I think that so everybody, that Stanford is now sort of stands alone really with this very reflective and continuing to keep that sort of long form essay that you don't see as much. And so, that what matters most and why. What tips would you give for people in terms of what you think Stanford really wants to see in this essay?
Yeah, no, that's a great question to start out with. I would say the first thing is to go deep and be personal and be honest. I read a lot of Stanford GSB admissions essays, and I can tell you that the ones that stand out the most are those that share the personal side of their story. So one thing I would say is the actual answer to the question needs to be clear, because sometimes I read these essays and I'm like, I get this is a really interesting story, but what actually matters most to you? I'm missing the answer. But don't just give the answer and then list, here are the reasons why. You really need to go a step deeper in the why behind the why. So for example, you might have a great story about, I don't know, you interned in sub-Saharan Africa and you realize the importance of food security in the world, and therefore what matters most to you is something like that. Well, that's great, but why is that important to you? Why do you think food security is important? Because I know it's an obvious answer, but the GSB is looking to understand you personally. How do you think about the world? How have you experienced the experiences you had? How have they impacted you and helped you come to the conclusion of what matters most to you and why? So the more analytical the essay is, that's just like, this is, what matters most, and here are 3 reasons why, the less I actually learn about you, unless you explore how each of those impacted you as a human being.
Got it. And I don't think that there is, this is definitely not a cookie cutter kind of thing where their good answers could come in many forms and formats. So I don't know if people are struggling with, do I have to, actually overtly say it right up front, or can I sort of let it build? And it should be, I would think, that if someone is reading it, so a trusted friend, whoever, after they read it, they should very clearly know whether it's said or left unsaid. What would you say?
I agree. You don't have to use the words, what matters most to me is. However, I do think, to your point, if a friend reads it, they should immediately be able to say back to you, so I'm thinking what matters most to you is X. And they should get it right like 100% of the time. A lot of the ones I found that are effective will actually start with a compelling opening, kind of go through a story, and midway I figure out what matters most. And then they kind of continue, and by the end, it kind of wraps it back up again. But again, any format will work as long as the messaging comes across. What doesn't work is when somebody just kind of rambles and has a great story, and then you're kind of lost with like, wow, that was super interesting, but what actually matters most? It could be A, B, or C. And you don't want to leave the reader guessing, because while like an admissions counselor is going to read your essay a million times, an actual admissions office is going to read it once. So either they get it or they don't.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually something that I really like about our Stratus process, which I think is so it's hard to replicate. I don't think that any other firm does it the way we do it. But, you know, when we work with someone, so I have a lot of clients that are applying to GSB, and Leila is often the one who reads it, and she hasn't talked to our clients. She doesn't know that person, kind of in the same way that Stanford, when they're reading it, they haven't had a lot of conversations with you. And when we got to get impressions for something like this is confusing. And sometimes when you're working with someone, you know, having weekly calls, you almost get to know them so well that you lose the ability to kind of realize when you're reading something, what do you know from something else, and does it live in this conversation? There's something that one of the former admissions directors used to talk about, and I think this used to be on the website for Stanford, and it just shows you how quickly technology has changed. But they used to talk about if you left your Stanford essays on the copier at your office, you know, because you were making copies of it or something, and someone saw it, that they would feel, you would feel maybe a little vulnerable that you'd shared too much of your, or a little something. Now, I don't think anybody goes to the office anymore, nor does anybody do anything with a copier. So I don't know how to replicate that in today's fast-paced world. But I do think that it's not that you have to have some horrible thing happen to you or you have to reveal something, whatever, but it's more that you open the window into some vulnerabilities or something about yourself that tries to help them get to know who you are, right?
100% agree. I would think about, if you were, what would you feel comfortable saying to your best friend or your best relative or whoever it is you feel like you can be your authentic self with, or, you know, maybe even your therapist. I've read some essays where I was like, wow, that was a lot. But it really shows the admissions committee that you are willing to be vulnerable, because there's some curriculum, like we'll talk about later, this interpersonal dynamics class at Stanford, which is unique to Stanford. You know, Stanford cares a lot about leaders who are both introspective and have the ability to develop a high EQ or emotional intelligence, so that they can become the kind of leaders who care about others. And the best way to care about others is to understand yourself first, because it gives you the openness and ability to bond with others and understand where they're coming from, which makes you a better leader. So I do think that the more you dig deep into who you are as a person and your motivations and how you're experiencing life, the more effective your essay will come across. Because just like Donna said, it doesn't have to be some super cool, authentic story. It could just be something from, you know, management consulting situation that would be pretty standard. But if you take it the next level and talk about how you personally experienced it and how it changed you, then it will be just as compelling as someone who has some crazy travel story that turned into this big event.
Yeah. And it's interesting in talking, we spend a lot of time talking to the admissions teams at different schools over the summer. And I would say, while a lot of other schools are moving towards that, again, shorter essay, almost AI proof essay, Stanford, I think, has put a flag in the ground that they like this, what matters most. And it's really iconic. And it's also something that, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, Leila, you know, you meet another Stanford alum and you get into a conversation and you talk about what matters most. It seems like it's almost part of the ethos of Stanford at this point.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think all the alumni would rebel if they try to get rid of that essay question, because it really feels like what differentiates the community.
So, all right. And so then there's obviously, there's many parts to the Stanford. So even we're talking about the admissions questions and the essays, there's that. And then there's also sort of a very standard, you know, sort of why Stanford, which is brief and yet then open to a lot of interpretation. What kinds of advice and tips do you have for people in terms of who do a good job of addressing that?
Yeah, I think the main thing is I would definitely tailor it specifically to Stanford, because when I read admissions essays, the number one mistake I see is I will read it and think they can copy and paste this and send this to probably 5 other top business schools and it would work the same. So you want to move away from the standard answers like, I want to build my leadership skills and become a strategic thinker. It's okay to say those things. But what you need to really dig deep into is how Stanford specifically, whether it be the curriculum, the location near Silicon Valley, the alumni, the specific offerings, how does that relate both to what do you want to accomplish in your career and as a person, and how you are able to contribute to that community, given what that community looks like and what you bring to the table. So the best Why Stanford essays both include like what you're going to get out of Stanford and also what you're going to give back to the community as well. But definitely the more specific the possible. And no, you don't have to just like list a bunch of classes. Well, they have these 5 classes that are awesome and I want to take them. No, right. Like it's better to list actually less specific classes and give more context around like why is that class important to you and how it will help you develop what you're looking to get to your next place.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I see that, and talking about like all the things with AI out there, obviously you could do a search or you could just look at their website and just grab all these things. Just saying them, they know they have them. So that's not really giving them anything. What they don't know is why it's going to be helpful to you. And so I find that when people really go deeper and maybe say why this particular class could help them with this problem they're having at work or with this situation that they've seen, or perhaps that they've had a conversation with someone who shared why this was so helpful and they feel like that would be helpful to them too. Those are the things that really move it to more, credible, give me a much better sense that the person has done their homework to that. And right. This is actually, I'm going to get to the optional, but this is also something that, not everybody can visit Stanford. So, how important do you think, I think you can get a lot of your research online. You can get a lot of research by going to online events or something like that. But what is your take on the importance of, actually physically being there, especially that some of the people and a lot of people on this are probably, calling in or listening in from a lot of places all over the world?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's that critical that you physically visit the campus. I live in the US, but I was working on Wall Street at the time I was applying to business schools, and there was like no chance I was going to be running around visiting all these business school programs I was applying to. But what I do think is important is that you do your research. So it shows that you are actually committed to that school and you do think that is the right program. So I think nowadays so much information is available online and there's opportunities to connect virtually with campus events, with alumni. So you do need to try to engage with the university and show that you've made your effort. But I wouldn't worry at all about like physically visiting the campus. I don't think they really take that into consideration, because when they read your essays, it's around like, is it the right fit for you?
Right. And I think that's, so that I just want that out there because I don't want people to feel like they have to do that. That being said, I have had some clients who have been successful who did visit. And I think that you should almost think of it more from every time I step onto the campus at Stanford, I'm just sort of like, in awe. And it's just like feeling like, wow, this is a place where amazing things happen. And there's so much inspirational artwork around the campus. And, relative to most other business schools that tend to be in sort of colder climates, it seems like it's always just beautiful and sunny at Stanford. And it's just like a gorgeous place to be. So I think it's very powerful to do that, but it's more beneficial to you. And I don't know that it's going to necessarily increase your chances. And, it looks like last year's acceptance rate for the class of 2026 was just under 6%. So a lot of people feel very much that want to go to Stanford. So it's not like they need to know that you want to go to Stanford. But anyway, so just take that with a grain of salt. Now let's talk about the optional. And there's so many different things. And I personally have some mixed feelings about these optional essays because I think they cost a lot of stress for people. But what I'm talking about is, you can add 3 extra sort of achievements if you want. And, they say it's optional. I think that causes stress. What's your take on that?
So my take is that, I say they are and are not optional because there's different optional essays, right? And let's say the impact essays, we'll start with that one since you mentioned it. Most people are going to answer that question. So then you might feel like you need to answer it. But the one thing I would say is only include enough impact stories that you feel are actually strong impact stories where you can explain how you personally did something and explain the connection between what you did and the outcome. Because I definitely read impact stories where it sounds like, okay, you did your job, good,
Right.
and I don't really like leave an impression on me other than I just lost 20 seconds of my life. But so I would say, write your stories. If you only have one really good story and two, do the one story. I would definitely do an impact story because most applications do them, but only do the number that you can talk, really well about. The other thing I would recommend, and, again, is totally optional, is, given there are three, if you feel like you have three stories, I think it's advantageous if there are three different kinds of stories. So maybe you're, in business already and you have like a business story. I would not make all three about that. Maybe one of them, if you're going to do three, could be related to your personal life, or it could be to a hobby, or even your family. I mean, it could really be, I read one the other day about just like changing somebody's opinion, and it was in the personal life. And I thought that was super cool. So don't feel like you have to prove that you are like a business person who got the revenue up X%. That's your resume, right? The impact stories are to really show what you personally did. The other thing I would caution around is I see a lot of, I did my job and they took my market research for the CEO to make this decision, and revenue for the company that quarter was up X%. Well, I'm kind of like, well, okay, like there's a million things that cause the revenue of that company to be up X%. So I don't really believe that your market research did that unless you actually have something very specific. Like, for example, maybe there was a new initiative the company wasn't sure if they should launch, and your research led to them launching that initiative. And that initiative is the reason why revenue was up X%. Like that would actually draw a line that shows you had impact. But you don't want to have a story that, falls flat, I guess is my point. It's better to have less than too many. And the other one I would caution about is there's one essay that's basically like, if you have any extenuating circumstances, please write it here. Don't use that, even though they say it in the application, people don't listen. Don't use that to just write an extra, here's my accomplishment essay, because that actually annoys the admissions committee. Only use that if you actually do have extenuating circumstances.
Got it. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
For your
college. And I'm going to stop for a second. I see that there's some comments, and certainly put your comments in here. I'm going to talk about, so there's a couple questions of what's the average GMAT focus score for Stanford. And actually the focus score, that is actually, I don't think any school has actually put out their focus score. And I mentioned this on the Wharton deep dive the other day, and it's worth mentioning here. Right now, Stanford's got on their website for the class of 2026 profile that their GMAT score is 738 average. Now, when you take the focus now, and you may have a great score and it's going to be 675 or something, you're going to look at that and go, wow, that's way off. So recognize that the focus scores are calibrated differently. And, here's the thing about Stanford, and their average GRE verbal is 163 and the quant is 164. Here's the thing. Stanford can take whoever they want. I don't think they worry about their average. I mean, they have a very impressive group of applicants, and they can be very choosy. But if they really like you and your profile, I have heard admissions people talk about being proud of taking someone who is fairly far outside of that average. So I don't think it's something that I wouldn't hang my hat on that. And, to the issue of this is, I think, a challenge for Stanford. So many people want to go there. Lots of people apply. You don't have great odds. So if you're someone who really wants to go to business school 100% next year, and you only apply to Stanford, you have, given yourself a tough job. But you can apply to Stanford and, other schools. So I think that's, I don't know I know they always want to have more people apply. It's the problem of success, I guess. I don't know if you have anything to, add to that. It is what it is.
Yeah, no, I would agree that if you are outside of the average range, you still have a chance to get in. It just means that your story has to be that much better. so that they have a rationale for why they let you in. So, I wouldn't obsess if you're right outside the range. If you're significantly below the range, then definitely make sure you have a lot of backups.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you could argue, and I think they feel this way, and I do feel this way somewhat for my clients. The act of doing this very comprehensive and thorough thought process of what does matter to you the most and why is a useful exercise for anybody to go through. And a lot of the things that are touched upon in Stanford's application can be parceled out or maybe help your thinking for other schools. So there is that small benefit there, or maybe it's not a small benefit. It's a, you, I think are, once you get into business school, you're so busy, you don't have time to think about why you're there, what you really do. And so taking the time before you go into Stanford or any, business school where you're making a big transition, it really makes sense to spend some time reflecting on these very important things. And it says, what's the scholarship criteria and can I get fully funded? And that's, I would say, it doesn't appear that most people, when you get into Stanford, it seems like that's the prize, like that, and the getting in is, and that through their financial aid and different things that happen a little bit later in the process, a lot of people do get some funding, financial aid. There is a Knight Hennessy scholarship, which is a separate, you actually have to apply to that separately. And that is an opportunity, you can apply to that with your Stanford application. So that would be a case where there could be an option to get a, full ride. I don't know if there's anything else. Otherwise, we'll kind of switch gears.
The only thing I'll add to that specific topic is that when I was at Stanford, and you'd have to check if this is still the case, there were loan forgiveness, like scholarships, but loan forgiveness, what do you call it?
Programs.
Projects or whatever. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Programs for people who went into certain sectors. So for example, if you went into like a public sector or certain nonprofit sectors, there was a loan forgiveness process. So I would also explore that if you're looking at taking on a career that might not have the financial ROI that others would.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And actually that's a great point for a lot of business schools. They had that kind of program at Kellogg when I was there, 20 plus years ago. So that kind of thing has been around. So yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit now, we'll switch gears, with all the access to Silicon Valley, with all the tech and VC that is in Stanford, in the whole community there, what kinds of candidates do you think are the best fit for Stanford? And also anything in terms of that you want to say about career options or best, best synergies that Stanford can give?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. First, their slogan, change lives, change organizations, change the world. And I feel like that's the best tip into what kind of person they're looking for. You do not have to be like a forward-thinking entrepreneur. You don't have to be, I want to go in the tech sector. That's not it. It's about the mindset, which is, someone who's willing to challenge the norms, someone who's innovative, someone who cares about, making changes. And that can be within any kind of organization. It doesn't matter if it's a small one or a big one. And so I think the main criteria, and that's why they have that What Matters to You essay, is that they're trying to get into your mind to see like, what kind of person are you? Are you looking for ways to better people's lives? Do you have the EQ to connect with people to be able to do that? Are you going to be afraid of change, or have you had impact that will allow you to kind of push against norms and, get people on board to make things happen? And do you have a global mindset about the whole change the world? So I do think that the main thing is to show how open-minded you are and hungry you are to move things forward. And, a lot of times in the essays, people will come discuss their inspirations and problems they've seen in the world. To the extent you can about those problems and how you see potential solutions. I don't mean like the answer. I just mean like the thought process around like, here's a problem I would like to tackle and how I think I could make the world better. I think that always helps in your applications.
Mm-hmm. And how about, it's interesting. A lot of the people coming into Stanford's class actually do have a consulting background. And certainly I would think a fair number of people who come out, in some way go to consulting. Although I don't think of, when I think of a successful Stanford applicant, I don't think of someone who says, my goal is to be an associate in management consulting is somehow the is the norm, although I'm sure they get some of that. And again, I guess it's just about really zeroing in what's something you feel like you can make better or want to make better in whatever role that you're in. Is that maybe a good way to think about it?
Yeah, I think so. And just to add to your comment, to make like an anecdote, a lot of the management consulting firms, they come to campus like fall, right? And everyone still has this dream of doing a business, but there's this job offer on their desk. Like, what do I do? So the management consulting firms, at least when I was there, always had optional start dates to start like, oh, right after graduation or November or even January. And so, just as an example, I had friends who, accepted and said, I'll start in January. And then they started their entrepreneurial venture to see if it worked. And some it did and some it didn't. And some ended up going to consulting and some didn't in January kind of thing. But the point is that you have different options. And, something like a Stanford degree also gives you kind of, I hate to say backup plan, but if you, do an experiment and it doesn't work professionally and you want to go back to something traditional just because maybe you just need to for your personal or financial reasons, you always have that option. And so, to Donna's point, I think either career path is a great place to go after Stanford.
Got it. Okay. And I'm going to actually circle back to an admissions thing because we have a question from Cody. I'm not quite sure what he's talking about. He said Stanford changed the essay topics this year, but I don't think they did change the essay topics. What matters most and why is the same, and why Stanford is the same. So I'm not really sure what he's talking about. And then he's also asking what would be a good topic, what matters most, if for an entrepreneur, would you, be personal or professional? I guess that's what, yeah.
I think either one could work perfectly fine. I've seen really good ones on both areas. So I think it just depends, which story do you have the most you can share about how it has personally impacted you and impacted your outlook for what you want to do with your life. So I would not say one or the other is better. I think whichever one you feel like you can talk to best from the heart.
Yeah. And maybe this is a good segue. I see that he's got a question about recommenders, and it's how should we choose? I have a question about how we should choose our recommenders, but before I do that, it's like he's sort of saying is if your direct supervisor is not an option for an entrepreneur, who would you recommend? And I'll give my take, and then if you have anything to add, obviously if you are an entrepreneur, you might have a board, you might have an advisory board, there might be somebody who's seeing part of your vision and your plan. You want someone who's kind of had some vantage point to see what you're doing, but they don't necessarily have to be a direct report. That would be my suggestion. And I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I would agree. I think whoever has the most context they can draw upon in terms of your abilities and resiliency and how you interact with others would be the right person to talk to. Also, someone you can trust who cares about you and your success, because sometimes it can be very challenging to get recommenders to actually finish the recommendation, get them in on time.
Yeah.
And so, one way you could approach it is a lot of times people work with a lot of people and they can't remember the exact story about you. When you approach them from day one, I would actually mention like, hey, do you remember that time we did this, this, and that? I thought you'd be a great person to write recommendation. Would you be open to that? Do you have the time? Do you think you could write a compelling one? If not, totally understand, because I know how busy you are. I mean, you want to give them an out, and two, remind them of what they could talk about in your essay, or I'm sorry, in your recommendation, in terms of doing that. I do see Cody was also asking about being a failed entrepreneur. Someone wrote, I just saw it.
Yeah, I will say this is good. We've got some active chats in here. So we've got lots of people asking questions.
I wanted to address something I thought was really interesting. I don't know where it went, but I saw a question while we were checking them about if you have a history as a failed entrepreneur over 10 years, is that like good or bad for you? I think that failure stories are phenomenal. Like the best stories that you can bring to an application, because every failure is like an opportunity to learn and grow and dig deep and take on new skill sets. And so I actually think if you have like 10 years of failure, but you can actually address them and show how you've grown through them, you're going to have like the strongest essays versus someone who had a traditional, like I did my 2 years, I got promoted path. What do you think?
No, I actually, I fully agree. Right now, I'm a big tennis fan, and the US Open is on. So I was just watching some of those matches last night, and when you lose a close match, right? I'm sure that Naomi Osaka is going to be learning a lot more than Amanda, Anisimova, who just beat her in a very tight match, because she's going to be thinking about where were those little moments that I could have done something a little better. So failure can be, a great teacher. And especially if you are insightful with confidence, right? So,
Yes.
and be confident enough to talk about your failures. I think that is really the difference. Not talking about your failure with shame, but talk about your failure with confidence. And that actually
100%.
makes huge. Then one more thing about recommenders, and this is a tip from actually from Kirsten Moss, the old admissions director. She used to tell people, ask someone, can they write you a great recommendation? Because you don't want to, milk toast recommendation. And if the person doesn't feel like they know you well enough, or doesn't feel like they could be that cheerleader for you, by you asking it that way, you're kind of giving them an out. And I'm also a really big fan of people asking either on Zoom or video or face-to-face, because someone could say, yes, and make this face like, I don't really want to do this. And so if the body language is telling you that there's some disconnect, that is your EQ cue to perhaps, soft pedal an option and out, or just also do some of your diligence around, if someone is getting ready to have knee replacement surgery, or they're going on some kind of sabbatical right when the thing is due, maybe that's not the best person. If you observe that this person is great, but they're consistently late getting things done, that might not be good. Sometimes, as a tip, I will tell people, tell your recommender the suggested deadline is 1 week before that you want.
Yes.
So that, you can maybe, that. Anyway, I see that we're getting a couple other things. So let me just see if there's anything around. Actually, I'll jump ahead, and maybe this is not that far jumping ahead on our question list, but joint degrees. So there's a question about, is it worth pursuing any joint degrees at GSB? How does that help with chances? I think I saw that maybe 20% of the class is studying a joint degree along with it. I think there's richness across the Stanford campus. So I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, I think pursuing a joint degree in some ways might feel like it's harder, but I would say, to be honest, everyone who's there is leaning into whatever it is they're doing. So if you're interested in a joint degree, it does not help or hurt your chances of getting into the GSB from my perspective, but I think it's a great opportunity that Stanford offers. I knew a ton of people when I was there who especially did the joint with either law or education. Those are really popular ones when I was there. I know they also have joint degrees with engineering and humanities and services, in medicine. There were some people I knew who were doctors who wanted to do like biotech firms later. Sustainability is kind of a bigger thing over the last 10 years or so. But I would say that if you're interested in a joint degree, I would definitely look into pursuing it. But if you're not sure you want to go that far, you also have the option through electives to take a lot of classes on the across the road at the campus. So for example, I was really focused on international business. And so I really wanted to double down on languages and not just like the ones offered at the business school. So I took multiple languages across the street. So I ended up taking, total I speak like 5 languages. And a lot of that is thanks to what I did at the GSB. But a lot of other people took things within the other faculties. And I think the extent to which that meets your goals, and you can even talk about that in the Why Stanford essay, you can do research on what happens outside of the business school and, bring some of that in. I wouldn't make it your primary focus, but you can show why Stanford specifically is even a better school for you because of what they do, not just the business school, but also somewhere else that you can bring into your academics.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I completely agree. That's good insight there. Let's talk about, we didn't talk about this, but Stanford also has, pretty unique here in that they have also an MSX program where you can apply when you do your application, you can actually apply to both. And I think sometimes people are really like, is that really separate? You can apply to both. I believe if you do get selected for an interview, you have to choose, but any comments about MSX versus MBA and maybe any interactions that you might have had or any observations to share on that?
Yeah, the first one I'll answer is they are 2 separate admissions committees. So yes, they are looked at by 2 different teams. So, don't worry that it hurts you to mention you're also considering the other program, although you do have to address that in the Why Stanford essay. But I definitely, when I was at the GSB, I did interact with some of the executive MBAs, but not extensively. So I do feel like that program is a little bit cipher, they're kind of hang out amongst themselves more, but it's really not for any other reason than the schedules tend to be quite different. And so I think the MSX program is amazing for careers, for when you're in a career and you want to take yourself within that career to the next level. I think that it's, the MBA is better for someone who wants to do more of a career change, because having that internship in the middle of the 2 years is really helpful, and not just getting experience to prove you can do that career, but also helping you decide if that's really what you want to do.
Yep.
And both are going to give you the same quality of education. It kind of depends on how much time you have to devote to it, and also how much of a shift you want to make in your career path.
Okay. And now I see another question that says, do they value diversity? As from what I have heard, some batch might contain an actor who have acted in Disney movies to the next generation entrepreneur of a big conglomerate. I would imagine, and all business schools to some degree, I remember when I would be part of the, orientation, they'll let somebody in this class has an Olympic gold medal, and there's a good chance they're actually at Stanford. But or somebody has has been in this in some kind of business, or is a professional athlete or whatever. So I think you're not going to have just a huge index in any school of that, because most people are coming through sort of there's certain feeder pipelines. But I think anybody who's had the ability to have an impact and be able to articulate that, if you can be the best, I always think if you can be the best at anything, and that's, sometimes I work with athletes, and it's like, if you have the drive to be able to be excellent at something, there's a very high likelihood that you have the transferable skills to use that same process to become excellent at business or something like that. So, I think that alone isn't going to get you in. Some people just play, and I see there's a follow-up question, kind of like if they're involved in, lawn, the sport of lawn bowls, which would that be like, oh gosh, now I'm drawing a blank.
Cricket, maybe, or
maybe talking about cricket. That alone is not going to get you into Stanford. But there could be someone who's playing cricket who is also like developed some kind of huge, like mentoring program to help young kids who have never been exposed to sport grow in confidence through sport. And if they did that, and that's part of their mission, and they've had this huge impact, then maybe yes. But if you're just like someone who kind of shows up on the pitch, does your thing, does it really well, goes home, back to your regularly scheduled sort of regular life, probably not. So I don't think, I think I would approach this more from, again, from this idea of how have you had impact? And when they talk about change lives, change organizations, change the world, they start with change lives. So it could be the impact is like what you said, Leila, it's you changed one person's worldview, or you changed one person, and that had a ripple effect. You changed, maybe you helped your friend overcome some kind of an addiction problem, and that stabilized their family, and that changed lives. And that, so I think sometimes people worry, everybody who applies to Stanford has not cured cancer in the last year, so don't take all this, I think you really have to start from where you are and think about how you've made wherever you can see better. Let's see. I think we've covered a lot of what I wanted to cover there. So let's talk about some of the things, and I think this would be great for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to maybe talk to an alum and understand more about what goes on in the campus and some of the courses. There's a course called Interpersonal Dynamics, and so maybe tell us a little bit more about what you have, how that's shaped maybe your life, and how you see the world differently or are better interpersonally because of some of the experiences you had.
Yeah, and I think that course is really what defines the experience. To give you an idea, like the first day, we all come into this room with our cohort, and the facilitator does nothing, and everyone sits there and stares at each other, and then just sees what happens. Like, it's so creepy. But the point of this program is that it makes you aware of how the way you act, including your facial expressions, your posture, saying something, not saying something, impacts others. So I had been given some feedback, for example, from someone out of nowhere who was like, oh, 3 months ago, I kept walking past you in the hall and I would smile at you and you wouldn't respond. I thought, she doesn't want to be my friend. And I'd be like, what? Like, and I'm like I naturally have a lot of social anxiety. So honestly, I was in the hall being like, oh my God, I just need to get to my classroom. You know what I mean? And so I didn't even notice this person was smiling at me. And because of my social anxiety, I thought this person probably doesn't want to be my friend anyways, because I didn't cure cancer. So I'm just going to like get to my classroom. And, and I think what it did was it just like opened my mind to, what the world is there. And I would say with exception, obviously, but in general, people want to be, work with you. People want to be your friend. People want to bond with you and build businesses with you. And I think if you start from the place of, of confidence in social situations, and also giving others the benefit of the doubt in any social situations, it teaches you a lot that's useful in your personal and your professional life. Because I think it really allowed me at work, especially when I would see that person who everyone thought was like the grumpy, difficult person in that role, I would be like, they're probably having a bad day. Like, you don't know, like, what's going on in their life at home. Like, maybe they just need a hug. I mean, you can't nowadays give them a hug. But my point is, like, it gives you the perspective to take a step back and wonder what's going on in that person before jumping to judgment.
No, I think actually this touches on something that, and Stanford, like, is, again, lots of just groundbreaking, leading the pack in this. But I think the higher, the more, the more you have responsibilities, and the more these, our own insecurities or just kind of being too much within ourselves holds us back, and I do remember, and I went to Kellogg, and at the time when I was at Kellogg, it was actually in that series where Business Week had rated it the #1 school for like 3 cycles in a row, so like 6 years running. And I remember just feeling like, oh my gosh, my classmates have started 5 companies before breakfast, and I just like, I'm just like here, and we do that to ourselves, and that doesn't help us. And it's kind of like, just get away from worrying so much about like what everybody else is doing, or just even understanding how your example was great, like how we project things onto people that aren't there, or we are missing something because we're, not really paying attention, and learning how to truly listen. And that's not I mean, leadership is a big part of all of these MBA programs. It's really so important, and it's really so important. And you can't actually learn sometimes what your blind spots are or your vulnerabilities unless you are in a safe space. So I guess some of those classes create this safe place where you can, because if someone says something critical to you and you don't like the person, you kind of assume that they're just saying it because they're trying to get their jabs in, but if you know that the person actually is on your side and is trying to tell you something, and if you can step outside of yourself, and that is something that, it's not like that you get cured of that or you're done like when you graduate from an MBA. Like, that is lifelong work to kind of keep becoming more aware. How do others see you? How are the subtle things that you're doing perhaps attracting or reflecting or rejecting opportunities, things like that. So anything else about how did you find, just tell us maybe some of the things that you most enjoyed like on campus. And I don't know, obviously things have changed a lot. I don't know when you were most there recently. I was just there, and we were having a conversation in preparation for this, how, just that wall of change with these pixel colors that change. And I think they have 8 hours worth of, you can stare at that wall all day and look at the colors change. Apparently not see it again for 8 hours. But is there anything that, inspired you, or really you felt like was just so, something that you look back on with fondness of your time, on the campus at Stanford?
Yeah, that's a big question. Back when I was there wasn't even the Knight building, by the way. We were in
wow.
Small, dingy building. Now it is very nice and very fancy. But I mean, honestly, like my greatest memories are all related to two things. You know, the different clubs I participated in, because that's where you find those niches of people who are just super passionate about something that you didn't realize other people were also passionate about, just like you, and pursuing those things together. And you know, the other area would be like conferences that I got involved in helping organize. So I worked on an innovation conference for Italian companies and entrepreneurs, and I'm actually dual citizen with Italy right now. It's a whole thing. Anyway, so I would say like the best part for me was going really deep on topics with people who shared those passions. So
great. So I also saw a comment. Listen, if you're enjoying this, and it sounds like we're getting a lot of engagement, so like this video, it'll help it sort of rise up in the algorithm. But you know, definitely do that. There's a question here. Does having a reference letter from a GSB alum or current student add value to the application? And I don't know that we can fully answer that since we are not officially speaking as Stanford AdCom, but I will say my general take on that kind of question is, if you're fishing around for it, like if you're like my Uncle Fred's brother, Harry's cousin went to Stanford, and you're trying to like have this person reach out and say something, then, you know, it could be annoying and it's not going to be helpful. If there's really an organic, you know, you happen to, you know, have worked with, you know, a professor in some startup, or if you happen to have an authentic connection that is really not something you need to worry about because it's driven by the alum or that connection who feels compelled knowing that you're applying to do something. I don't think there's anything overtly that I'm aware of that's it's you know, like you can't do it, but I don't think it's something that you should. There's so much information they're asking from you. I don't think they need any more. What's your take?
I would agree with that, and I think I would still stick to the rules of who makes a good recommender that we talked about earlier. And if it happens to be a GSB person versus a non-GSB person, and they have the exact same value they can add, go with the GSB person. But you know, when I see people like name dropping in their applications, I don't think it comes off as any stronger unless there's like a really good story behind it. And someone has posted a couple times about how universities view applicants who have business work experience and those who have successfully built their own businesses from scratch. I'm not sure if the question is like, do they view them differently or not? But I think either one can have just as a compelling story. Just like we were talking about, if you're coming in as an athlete versus someone from a traditional background, I think it all comes down to whether or not you have personally had an impact and whatever you did. And I do not think that they have a preference for one or the other, even though I think there could be a feeling that Stanford has so many entrepreneurs. I bet they prefer entrepreneurs. I just don't think that's the case in reality. So, you know, whichever background you have, I wouldn't worry about one being stronger than the other.
Yeah. And I would say I'm seeing a few questions too to these things about, you know, I would say if you're really curious about who's coming in, look at the Stanford, you know, class profile, because they'll tell you what, you know, backgrounds people come from, again, what their average GPA is, what their test scores are, all that. I also will tell you that you're wasting your time to bother with that, because it doesn't matter. You know, all you can control is being the best you that you can be. And you can't be worried about, and more people, and this is for all people who are like aspiring to these top programs, like, what, you know, is my story good enough? You know, people ask, is it, you know, your story is your story. And, you know, and I think you just have to really concentrate on doing the best job you can telling it. Generally speaking, and I can't speak to exactly how long Stanford takes versus other schools, but, you know, roughly probably about a half an hour max that you have for someone who's reading your file and things, to kind of look at your resume, look at your transcripts, look at everything, and to get a sense of who you are. And when, you know, most people who are applying are, you know, in their mid-20s. So you have a lot of years to draw from. And part of your job is trying to figure out which of those moments do you choose to put on your resume? Do you choose to write about? Do you choose to do that? And I would spend my time really thinking about that, and not worrying about, nobody's getting, learning all these other things about what someone else's GRE score is really a rabbit hole that is not going to help you get to your goal. That's my thing. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but I want to also maybe talk a little bit about some things like views from the top, and people may or may not know about that. Share a little bit about that, or the lead talk series. So just some of those things that where you see exceptional value. And there's actually, I don't know, I'll let you talk about those and I'll go from there.
Yeah, I think the views from the top was one of my favorite things at Stanford. And I think a lot of business schools have that portion where they have successful business leaders come in and do a presentation and talk about their experience. I think that's, any top business school has that. But the talk series I thought was somewhat unique to Stanford. And that's where students themselves got a chance to have a moment in the limelight. And so, every week we had a different speaker, which was one of our own class, who would come up and share some unique story about them. And it has nothing to do with like showing off it, like, look what I accomplished in my career. No, it's about like, what makes you you, what makes you unique. So for example, I used to be, as a hobby, a competitive barroom dancer at night. And so I would talk about barroom dancing. And then somebody else was like a big diver and they talked about diving. And I just thought it was really great to get to know these peers on like a whole different level, because it gives you a way to both connect with them and also, reminds you that when we're in the business world and we're working with all these important CEOs and CFOs, like, they're all human beings who have hobbies, and, there's ways to connect with all these people. So we shouldn't be intimidated by them. And I just thought it was a great community building, tradition that would happen throughout the entire year, both years.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah, no, I think that's a good observation. And don't have anything else to add to that. We also didn't talk, and this may be something that people may or may not know. Stanford has a no grade disclosure policy. How do you find that? How did you find that what did your classmates feel about that? Or what was your take on that?
For those who aren't familiar with the term, the non-grade disclosure policy. So when we were recruiting and they would say, submit your, transcript or grades here, we just wouldn't. And we would explain that Stanford has a non-grade disclosure policy, there's like a matter of fact. And so honestly, it was awesome because it freed people to take courses that were real stretches for them, because there wasn't that pressure like maybe some people felt in high school or undergraduate to like, if I take that class and I get a B, like, how am I going to get a good job or whatever? No, everyone was able to take like these crazy courses, these design theory classes across the road, or something that completely out of the box for them or that they felt insecure about. And it made it so that you could take classes pass fail even. And so it was just a very low risk. And I think the whole point of getting a master's degree is to learn and stretch and grow yourself. And the only way to do that is if you feel comfortable taking risks academically and pushing yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
100%. And the employers, they know that, and they didn't blink an eye. And I don't think it in any way disadvantages us versus Berkeley kids across the road who are giving their grades. Everyone knows that if you got into a good business school, you're like really smart and you're like academically driven. And so I just don't feel like it's that as important when you're at that stage in life.
Yeah. No, that's, and then there's a new question that's come in. If you're interested in courses like product management, but likely offered at other schools, should these be avoided from the Y Stanford? And,
no, I'll jump in there. I mean, that product management is actually like, my husband's a product manager and he's a Stanford MBA. Like that is a traditional job to get actually after an MBA. So, like all the Amazons of the world and, Facebooks, their incoming MBA roles are often called product manager. So actually I wouldn't avoid something like that at all, because it's completely in line with the MBA path. But even if it weren't, I still wouldn't avoid it, because I think that if you have a story around what you want to do with your career and why the MBA makes sense and why this other random course will help you get there, I think as long as you have a cohesive story, it doesn't really matter what it is. If it was like, I want to take a career in like puppetry, maybe that makes sense. If you want to start a theater company, I don't know, but I'm just giving the example of kind of crazy to say that don't ever avoid anything as long as you can work it into your story.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think we're getting, and maybe there's the same question over, I think we've addressed that.
We've addressed it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's business. Really, And somebody could be, there could be somebody in the class, and again, there won't be a ton of people like this, but there could be somebody, again, who's an actor or who is doing something that is completely not business related. So you don't really about impact in whatever you. One of the people in the past listening to, a lot of chats from Stanford AdCom described it that sometimes there's some problem. I think this is a good way for us to think about things. There's some problem you care a lot about. Let's say you care about food and food insecurity or healthy food, access to food. That person who cares about that, if they're really into that problem, it's almost like gnawing, like you're chewing at this problem from different angles. So you might spend some time working in the food industry. You might spend some time working in health and nutrition. You might spend some time going to a underdeveloped country that maybe doesn't have traditional food and see what, you're looking at different aspects of that problem and how you might solve it. And I think that's when they're like, okay, I believe that you care about this because you've been looking, and then going to business school and getting your MBA is just one more way that you're getting more in your quiver, if you will, to be able to come and solve that problem, to have more ammunition to look at solving that problem. And what the problem is really doesn't matter. But if it's something you really care about, it shouldn't be just something that you spitball on, days when you're bored. It should actually be things where you've lived it and you've done things and you've talked to people and you've professionally explored different aspects. That's what and that might be a good place to kind of wrap up if we're not. Let me see if there's any other new comments. Yeah.
So I saw a question, can we include side hustles in the optional essay that were pursued for a short duration? I would say that's a great thing to add into your impact essays, but I would not just write an essay about it is there anything else you want us to know or extenuating circumstances? I would not include it there because that would be like you cheating and taking that space for an additional essay, but I would use that for an impact essay.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of young people today are kind of doing, there's all these different little explorations that people might have, starting an app in their spare time or doing some kind of thing. And I think that's fine. I think one thing I would just be clear, sometimes on the resume, also just be careful not to put them as two dual full-time jobs, maybe put it in an additional or entrepreneurial something, so that someone's not also thinking that you're shortchanging your, sort of full-time day job or something like that. And then let's see, how do you evaluate applicants who are at the very early stages of entrepreneurship and don't yet have tangible outcomes? I think, that could actually be a very interesting place to be, really, if you were like, I have these things I want to do, I don't know how to do them, and I need Stanford to help me. And you are very specific about what kinds of things you think Stanford could help you do. So, I think you just have to there's never a perfect time to go to business school. I think there's a wide range of people in a class, generally speaking, from probably 2 to 10 years, but there's probably a few, perhaps outliers on that. But yeah, I think it doesn't matter there, but I think it sounds like we've had a lively group here today. I really appreciate all your questions and the insights. And again, if you found this useful, go ahead and like the video. Leila and I wish you really all the best as you approach, whether you're getting ready for Stanford next week or later in the year or early January. Anything you want to add before we head out, sign off?
No, I just saw that last question that asked, can you describe a Stanford MBA in one word? And so I would say a change maker or innovator. One of those.
That's great. That's great. That's a great one. So, all right. Good luck, everyone. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Good luck.